Welcome, my friends. Today I'm going to narrate some conspiracy theories to help you fall asleep. But first, please like and subscribe to the channel. Also, comment down below where you're watching from. Thanks. I was 3 weeks into my new post at the Municipal Record Office when I first noticed it. A request for footage from a local protest in 1987, footage that should have been indexed and digitized like everything else, but instead led me to a broken link and a corrupted archive folder labeled Class G Visual. At first I chalked it up to clerical error. We were still transferring old VHS reels to digital, and the town's systems were a decade out of date. But something itched at me. The file name wasn't just missing, it had been deliberately replaced with random code, almost like it had been encrypted and then forgotten. I asked around casually, but no one recalled any protests that year, not even the lifer upstairs who'd worked since the 70s. The silence wasn't suspicious, just too still, like it had been cleaned. That night I replayed audio from the same reel batch and caught it, faint but sharp, beneath the analog hiss. An unfamiliar name whispered in intervals between static. I didn't recognize it, but it was mine. I pulled the batch and ran diagnostics, thinking it was a glitch or some prank left by the interns. But under the noise was something else. Files that weren't labeled in our system. Data logs marked, with military time, non-standard encoding, and metadata tagged acoustic, memory, resonance trial. Inside were weather reports from towns that didn't exist, citizen interviews that ended with the same phrase, "The clouds looked wrong" that day, and topographical scans that pulsed like sonar. One folder contained a list of street names, most matching our town's layout, but a few didn't, until I found they matched streets from towns across the country, all abandoned within a year of 1987. A trail emerged like dust behind a moving truck, bits of missing history, misfiled medical charts, and an oddly persistent reference to something called sub-channel theta. That same week, a public server reset itself without warning, erasing the files I had bookmarked. I kept backups, of course, but even those began to glitch, images distorting, logs rewriting themselves. It felt less like deletion and more like redirection. The further I dug, the more names I lost. People I knew by memory vanished from directories, obituaries removed from the local paper's archive, entire neighborhood registries showing gaps like deleted lines in a spreadsheet. Every source led back to Cold War-era programs we weren't supposed to know about. MK Ultra's audio offshoots, Operation Paperclip's relocation logs, even crude mind mapping tests from the 60s disguised as public safety drills. One handwritten letter, buried in a scanned document from 1985, said, "Let them remember wrong, it's safer." The implication was clear. Entire populations had been seeded with fabricated memories, timelines overwritten not with brute force, but through frequency, through sound. Not just controlled narratives, but implanted recollections, customized per town. And I wasn't reading this alone. Twice that week I noticed a grey sedan parked on the hill across from my apartment. A stranger in a supermarket said my name, like he was testing how I'd react. I pretended not to hear. I found the physical source by accident, an old broadcast relay shack off a service road behind the hills, listed on no modern map, but still drawing power from a forgotten utility pole. Inside was a chaos of aging tape reels, screens burned with grayscale, and a terminal that only ran in DOS. Files were there, all right, stripped of headers, marked with test subjects and radio frequencies. Listening to them was like falling into someone else's memory. Laughter from non-existent children, conversations I swear I'd had but couldn't place, a dog barking in a yard I'd never owned. Then came the voices, distorted, pitched wrong, speaking in patterns, sometimes repeating. The same day's events across dozens of logs with minor changes, like a reality being versioned in parallel. There were echoes of phrases from local news broadcasts, but skewed, like someone had played them backward, recorded them again, then re-injected them with a delay. One clip ended with my voice asking a question I never remembered saying. I uploaded what I could, preparing to send it anonymously to the press. Small stations, not the big ones, the ones that still answered late-night emails. But that week, a colleague resigned without warning. Another's apartment burned. Then the servers at City Hall crashed entirely, taking months of digitized files with them. Someone, or something, was catching up. At night, my own recordings would play back out of sync, like the device remembered things differently than I did. And then it hit me. What if it wasn't just others? What if I had been part of this? What if this wasn't something I'd uncovered, but something designed for me to rediscover? I began to hear my own voice in the files before I recorded them. Was truth still truth if it was planted? Or did it only matter to those still awake enough to question it? There was one final folder, hidden behind an executable disguised as an old tax record. It held a log marked Subject G01 Assimilation, baseline successful. The entry date matched my 6th birthday. The associated clip? A sound file, low hum, layered with a child's voice, counting backwards from 10, my voice. I don't remember ever being tested or relocated or part of any project. But I do remember a birthday party in a park that none of my family now remembers. I tried to tell someone, an old friend, but they just stared at me, confused, like the memory didn't stick. I had nothing left but the feeling that everything I'd uncovered was rehearsed, like the truth had been waiting for me to say it aloud, so it could disappear again. I don't know how much of what I found was real, or just real enough. The files are gone. The shack was bulldozed. My backups glitch when I open them, playing back random beeps and static. Maybe someone's still listening, maybe no one ever was. The only thing I know is this. When I dream now, I see roads that don't exist, and I hear names I've never spoken, but feel like mine. I wake with a phrase in my head that I didn't invent, but believe. The memory is the message. The first time I saw the lights, I was refueling on the edge of town just past midnight. 3 white spheres hovering low over the tree line, pulsing like breath, then vanishing without sound. The attendant said it was swamp gas, but the nearest wetland had dried up years ago. That night I noticed the local radio looped the same song 3 times in a row, each version slightly different, like the singer's tone shifted from joy to grief between takes. I thought it was a broadcast error until I realized the street cameras along Main were frozen, all showing the same timestamp. Nothing crashed, no one panicked. The world moved on like it hadn't happened. But that moment lodged itself behind my eyes like a tiny stone in the shoe of my mind. I couldn't explain why, but something in me knew that wasn't the last I'd see of those lights. I started pulling old police logs and town reports, anything digital I could access without tripping flags. What I found were patterns buried beneath paperwork, identical light sightings, odd fluctuations in electrical grids, and audio glitches filed as atmospheric distortions dating back nearly 2 decades. Most came from rural towns with declining populations and rising mental health cases, almost all marked by a unique note buried in the metadata: EV threshold unstable. I tracked one reference to a decommissioned weather station outside Denton, buried under a rock slide years ago. Its final transmission wasn't weather, it was a looped frequency that, when amplified, sounded like a human sobbing under static. It wasn't loud, it was careful, intentional, like it wasn't meant to be heard, just felt. Something was testing the air, and us. As I dug deeper, threads unraveled, classified experiments tied to acoustic conditioning in small communities, dating back to the 1960s, PSYOPs units deployed during Cold War-era drills but with no official record of return. I found evidence that COINTELPRO monitored rural therapists for emotive mapping under the guise of mental health outreach. A FOIA request gave me redacted transcripts from Project Echo Nest, where environmental variables were modulated to assess human resilience via emotional distortion stimuli. That's not weather, that's control. And then the disappearances: school teachers, truckers, nurses, all with zero history of illness, suddenly gone. Their families received condolence letters signed by agencies that no longer exist. Every town that reported the lights eventually lost someone. And every person lost had one thing in common: they felt too much. I followed the last breadcrumb to a collapsed library annex outside Claremont, where an analog server still hummed beneath the rubble, partially shielded by insulation. Inside, logs marked test fields, complete with emotional response curves, GPS overlays, and a directory labeled retention viable. The files played audio samples. One was a child's laugh, looped until it became indistinguishable from a scream. Another sounded like breathing, but layered in harmonic frequency bands, beyond human range. I found my own town listed, our dates, response metrics, and one final label: subject cluster R, pending cull. The lights, the signals, they weren't visits, they were trials. Emotional resonance measured like temperature. And somewhere in that server was a model of Earth, not ours but a filtered copy, built only from data of those who didn't break. I tried to send everything to an old contact who ran a pirate stream out of Denver, but 2 nights later their signal vanished mid-broadcast. My cloud backups corrupted themselves in front of me, replaced by long strings of numbers that matched, GPS coordinates to graveyards. Then I lost my voice for 2 days, no cause found. I began to wonder if I had already been marked, if resilience wasn't a strength but a curse. And worse, what if those who cracked weren't weak but lucky? I started to see it clearly. The lights didn't abduct, they recorded, tested, tagged. What if truth only matters to those still awake? I whispered it into a recorder. The tape melted the next morning. There was one final file, buried under a directory named Zero Feedback. It was a composite, a full-scale emotional map overlaying population data, showing selection zones like veins across a fading body. The culled weren't chosen for intelligence or health, but for endurance, for the ability to survive pain without collapsing. I thought I was uncovering something hidden, but Now I think I was meant to. Maybe part of the trial is knowing. Maybe awareness itself is the final measurement. I saw my name in that map, not highlighted, crossed out. I wasn't resilient. I was something else, something watched. I don't know if I stopped anything. The lights still come, closer, quieter. The towns don't scream, they flicker. I hear new frequencies now beneath power lines, behind voices under sleep. I still try to write it down, but the ink bleeds. Every truth I hold dissolves before it reaches the page. Maybe that's the point. Maybe survival was never about fighting back, but forgetting enough to stay behind. I used to think silence meant safety. Now I know it's just another form of sorting. And the quiet ones? They're already listening. Somewhere the second Earth is waiting. It started with a name I didn't recognize on the morning roster. Mara Thorne, Level 4 clearance. Printed cleanly between two people I knew well, yet no one else reacted, no one paused. It was as if she'd always been there, but I felt something hitch in my thoughts like a skipped beat in a record. And when I searched her name in the personnel directory, the screen blinked twice and turned up nothing, just a slow-loading wheel and a faint line of code in the corner, PRJ-CMLN. Reflect, not found, before the system corrected itself with a forced refresh, and I told myself it was a glitch, a hiccup, maybe a test file that slipped through. But the unease didn't fade. It hummed quietly through the vents, just beneath the fluorescent buzz. And when I passed Mara in the corridor and said nothing, she looked at me a moment too long, as if weighing the cost of being remembered. I waited until the end of the week, after the nightly wipe, what we called the drift, though no one said it out loud anymore, and combed through the archive lockers in Sector B, where dust lived thicker than memory, and the lights flickered like tired eyes. Inside an old terminal behind a cabinet, I found a sequence of weekly staff logs, each identical except for one detail. Every version included a different name that didn't exist the next week, each one tied to Level 4, each one erased like chalk from whetstone. And the deeper I looked, the stranger the gaps became. Access logs with mismatched timestamps, security footage where my own face glitched into static for frames at a time, and in one clip, just 2 seconds long, I was standing beside Mara Thorne, laughing at something, even though I couldn't remember her voice, her laugh, or even what that version of me had found so funny. And something inside me recoiled, not at the footage, but at how easily I accepted its absence. The silence followed me home, soft but wrong, like a door left open in a storm. And over time, patterns surfaced, MK Ultra protocols tucked into digital notes with our formatting, paperclip tags embedded in recruitment files, even stray mentions of a memory continuity directive linking COINTELPRO surveillance notes to Project Chameleon's first phase. And I realized none of us were ever evaluated. We were tested, rewritten, shaped like clay, and handed back. Our faces without fingerprints and those who asked questions began to fade. Ashby from Systems never showed for lunch again. Ramos's badge wouldn't scan, and Lila, who once joked about loop logic, now had a workstation scrubbed to factory reset, her scent still in the chair cushion, the kind that lingers for hours after someone leaves but never returns. And that's when I started writing things down by hand, on paper, I'd hide under floor tiles, afraid the system would notice if I remembered too much all at once. I found the server behind a false wall in the sub-basement, beneath the humming AC and the thick smell of damp metal, where the only sound was the slow drip of condensation and the soft, almost apologetic whir of cooling fans. The terminal flickered to life with a static hum, and the files inside didn't have names, just dates and voices, distorted and dragging like broken tape. Subject retained, fragment 44, overwrite failed, initiate correction cycle, and then a scream, half swallowed, raw, followed by silence and the shuffle of someone walking just out of frame. Always just out of frame, and one clip had my own voice reading a sentence I've never said, flat and mechanical. You are not who you remember, over and over, as if rehearsing a truth designed to bury itself. And I wanted to shut it all down, walk away, but I knew deep down that the moment I stopped watching, I might forget I ever came here at all. I copied what I could to a blind drive and mailed it from a Dropbox downtown. But when I came in Monday, Eileen's desk was cleared, the phone lines gave only feedback, and even the coffee machine pulsed with a red error light I'd never seen before. When I asked around, no one blinked. Eileen never worked here, they said, not with that name. Maybe I was mixing up departments, and someone smiled at me too kindly, the way you do when a child insists a dream really happened, and I felt the panic tightening like a collar, because I knew I was next. I could feel the rewrite brushing the edge of my mind like cold breath, and in the moment before I lost my nerve, I whispered to the empty stairwell, "What if truth only matters to those still awake?" And the echo came back sharper than it should have, like it was trying to answer. I stopped sleeping and started writing in codes I couldn't later decipher, hiding notes inside hollowed books and behind peeling drywall. But it wasn't enough. The last message I sent to my old contact bounced with a warning. Existence. Flag revoked. And I realized I'd gone too far, or not far enough. Even the reflections in the hallway mirrors didn't match what I felt anymore, like my face was being guessed at by a stranger each morning, and the final file I found, one. I shouldn't have remembered how to access, showed my personnel photo marked with a red glyph and the words retention failure. Reassign identity shell. And in that moment, I didn't feel fear, just a slow ache, the kind you get when you realize the story of your life was written in pencil by someone else's hand. Now, I don't know my name when I wake, but I know enough to fake it, enough to smile at the right people, to swipe the badge at the right door, to nod when someone says, "Glad you're still with us?" And though the walls feel thinner now and the lights flicker in slow Morse when no one's looking, I've stopped trying to fight it because I've learned. Resisting gets you erased, but silence gets you access. And in quiet moments, I still hear a voice, mine maybe, repeating a sentence I don't remember recording. The system doesn't need you to forget. It needs you to stop asking why. And sometimes I wonder if I'm the last version of me, or just one of many. Every morning starts the same, overcast light seeping through the blinds, the low hum of the base's power grid pulsing through concrete walls, coffee just warm enough to matter. There's comfort in repetition. It numbs the days, softens the edges of memory. I ran playback on a training session from last week, just habit. monitoring REM sync ratios, delta wave alignment, post-op reports. But at 2:43:19 there's a break. Just a frame, half a frame maybe. A name appears on screen that shouldn't be there. Mira. No rank, no face I recognize, just the word, flickering in the lower third like a half-erased subtitle. I rewound. It wasn't there, played it again, gone. The file logs show no edits, no corruption, but I saw it, clear as the flickering light above my desk. And that was the first crack. I didn't tell anyone. You don't report ghosts. I stayed late instead, combing the archives. Our sleep unit logs go back 13 years. Black folders, mislabeled drives, zero-indexed databases with handwritten tape numbers. I searched for Mira but got nothing until I stopped searching digitally and started flipping through old paper requisitions. Page 87 of Training Ops 9A had her name, scribbled in blue ink, circled twice. No surname. Next to it, Phase 2, Memory Imprinting, Dream Retention. I'd never heard of Phase 2. And suddenly that constant background hum started to feel louder, like it was listening. I boxed the file, stuffed it in my duffel, walked out slow. My boots echoed in the corridor like footsteps weren't mine. When I got to my bunk, I couldn't sleep, because I kept hearing that name again, like it had been there all along. They told us dreams were harmless, just a testing ground, controlled, reversible. Nothing from the simulations could bleed through, that's how they sold it. But I've been digging, and I found a name buried beneath the classified seal. Project Hypnos, tied to old MK Ultra subfiles, mostly destroyed after 73. They used sleep to rewire behavior, inject thoughts, train soldiers in dreams, lucid conditioning. Paperclip brought the methods, we just gave them better tech. One file mentioned ontological drift, loss of distinction between dream and waking states. Mira's name appears in the footnotes of those scans too, just once. She was flagged non-integrated. The file ends there, no death date, just a void. I've started seeing shapes in the mirror that move half a second slower than I do. I flinch when I wake now, like the room is catching up to me. Or maybe I'm catching up to it. The old comms building was shut down years ago after a fire, but my keycard still worked. No cameras inside, at least none that blinked. I followed the hum down to a room with wall-to-wall servers, many dead, some blinking with ancient life. I found an access port and plugged in. The drive cracked open like a coffin. Audio files mostly, garbled, layered with static, like someone had recorded dreams on magnetic tape. One file labeled Mirror Final played for 6 minutes. Her voice came through in broken syllables, whispering coordinates that didn't map anywhere. Then came silence. Then my own voice, layered under hers, repeating the words, "You're still dreaming." I've never recorded anything. I unplugged and left fast, but the lights in the hallway flickered out behind me, one by one, like they knew I was done listening. I tried to upload the files to an external network, but the signal died, just flatlined. My passcodes locked me out. I reached out to Keller from Phase 1. He'd been stable, clear-eyed. He didn't respond for 2 days. When he finally called, he whispered, "You remember too much. That's the problem." Then silence. I went to his quarters and found the lights on, coffee warm, but he was gone. No trace? It's like he was never here. I sat at my desk and stared at the screensaver cycling mountains I've never seen. I wonder now if the truth changes anything, or if it only matters to those still awake. I stopped sleeping 3 nights. Ago, every time I close my eyes, I see that training room, monitor glow, mirror strapped to the dream anchor, eyes wide open but somewhere else. I finally found her last session logs buried in a cold storage unit under a pseudonym, Subject 19. She never came out. The dream kept her, and the logs suggest she kept dreaming back. That's when it hit me. Our dreams weren't simulations. They were construction zones, rehearsals, and now they're foundations. The anomalies, the names, the echoes, their remnants. Leaks from dream space we thought we could control. I looked in the mirror this morning and didn't recognize the room behind me. It was familiar, yes, but wrong. Rearranged. Like someone rewrote the scene and forgot to tell the cast. I've stopped trying to prove anything. The files are gone. Now, systems reset. The server room was sealed this morning, burned out from a power fault. No one says anything. No one even looks at me. Maybe I've been flagged? Maybe I've always been. I see Mira sometimes, in reflections, in dreams, in the silence between waking seconds. She looks calm, like someone who knows how the story ends, or how it restarts. Sometimes I wonder if I ever left the chair, if I'm still strapped in somewhere beneath a facility that no longer exists, if any of this is memory or architecture. But what haunts me isn't what we built, it's what we invited, because dreams obey no chain of command, and when they wake, they don't always go back to sleep. It started after the Vanta headset release, which was pitched as the last screen you'll ever need. A sleek, almost weightless visor that layered augmented content over the real world with seamless precision. People called it magical, and within each weeks entire districts were alive with curated overlays, ads that danced when you looked at them, strangers re-rendered as influencers, buildings given false facades, so polished it made reality look like an afterthought. And for a while, it felt like we were all living inside something smoother than truth. But I noticed something strange in the quiet moments between transitions. A flicker in the corner of my eye when the overlay didn't quite line up with the street I knew, or a voice glitched into laughter when no one was around. And when my neighbour Celia didn't return from a weekend trip, and her apartment reset to vacant on the Vanta property app, I assumed it was a bug, until I checked our shared texts and found nothing, no call history, no photos, as if the phone itself had updated to a version of reality where she never existed. I stopped using my headset in private, started pulling old drive images and local logs from an off-network terminal I'd kept for freelance work, and buried deep inside a diagnostic folder labeled Spatial Persistence Cache were dozens of access tokens and fragmented image snapshots, all labeled with names I knew, Celia, Malik, Jun, that shouldn't have been there. Their files looked like incomplete renderings, faces warped mid-expression, geotags that pointed to coordinates in water or forest, places with no reception, no surveillance, and a strange line of code recurring in each. Replica, OK, user, synced, It got darker the deeper I went. I discovered internal reports from a shelved government program, co-developed with a private startup absorbed by Vanta last year. The documents watermarked Eidolon process, detailing early experiments on perception layering, identity transposition, and the long-term effects of replacing environmental anchors in live brains with synthetic reference. Buried in a test report was the phrase, "If subject achieves full environmental trust, reintegration becomes obsolete," followed by lists of terminated participants who were digitally merged and reassigned to what they called the corridor, a term never explained, just cited like an accepted destination, and I realized Vanta wasn't showing us a version of the world, it was redrawing which world we belonged to. I found a way into a decommissioned Vanta R&D node hidden beneath a logistics center, the access granted only because someone named K.L. Osler had left their credentials cached in a machine they must have assumed was wiped. Inside, the lab was cold and humming with forgotten power, walls lined with drives still spinning, and a testing pod locked from the inside with a dried handprint smeared across the inner glass. I pulled a backup from the core server and decrypted a file labeled Corridor Stream Live. The feed showed people I recognized, friends, co-workers, family, all standing in strange environments, forests that looped, cities with no weather, trains that never stopped. And one after another they looked into the camera, each whispering, "Do you remember me?" before the stream cut to static. In one loop, I saw myself enter the room I was already in, place the headset on, and disappear. I tried uploading the raw stream to any outlet that would take it, journalists, forums, darknet aggregators, but every time I checked back, the videos were gone, threads deleted, user accounts suspended, or marked compromised, and the headset began auto-syncing even when I didn't activate it, booting up during sleep mode, projecting overlays even when powered down. One night I woke up to find it placed neatly beside my pillow, lens glowing faint blue, like it had been watching, waiting. And I couldn't shake the phrase that returned in every debug readout. If continuity fails, blend the host. I knew I couldn't run and I couldn't destroy it. It would only trigger a relocation protocol. So I leaned into the data, broke the final encryption barrier, and that's when the collapse began. Messages arrived from people I'd never met, claiming to know me, with images of myself in places I've never been. A man in a gas station said he'd met me twice before under different names, showed me a photo of us smiling in front of a cabin I didn't recognize. And yet I remembered the feeling of being there, the light, the cold glass of the window I'd leaned against, as if the memory was being written into me in real time, like wet ink drying just fast enough to seem true. Now I move between places that don't show up on maps, rooms that reset when I blink, faces I almost remember, and sometimes I wonder if I already crossed over, if the version of me writing this is just a fragment allowed to exist as a test case to measure resistance in subjects nearing cognitive fracture, because every time I open a device, I hear my voice speaking words I didn't say, calmly narrating my own dissolution like an app tracking a user's final sync. The observer remains until the pattern holds. Do not alert the subject. Do not alert the subject. I don't know what I've become, whether I was taken, copied, simulated, or replaced, but sometimes in moments of stillness, I see shadows glitch across the horizon like unread renderings, and I realize I might be in a backup instance, an archived copy of a world that no longer needs us, only believes in our data. And in those moments, I ask myself, what if I'm the glitch the system hasn't purged yet? And the answer never comes, just the low hum of a server far away, spinning in silence, keeping the simulation warm. It started on a Monday, the kind that felt invisible, where the coffee was still too hot, and the office hum was just loud enough to blend into silence. I was reviewing climate sync's routine, lifeless work, when I caught a skip in a satellite. Radar loop from 3 days prior. One missing frame, 03:17 AM exactly. I thought it was a glitch, ran it again. Still skipped. I checked the master archive. Same second, same flicker. That time I heard a strange click in the audio feed, like a needle dropping on vinyl. Then nothing. The pressure dip over the Atlantic registered for only one reading, then disappeared. But the sensors don't misfire like that. Not all at once, not without a trace. I should have moved on, but I didn't. I replayed the clip until it blurred in my mind, a single second growing heavier each time. That night, back home, I kept feeling something just out of reach, like being watched through a closed door. I stayed up, not because I was scared, but because I felt like something had just begun watching back. Quietly, I started digging. I mirrored old radar logs to my personal drive, pulled anomaly readings from last year's databanks, filtered everything by silence, the kind of absence that feels edited. What surfaced wasn't immediate, but it was consistent. Slight dips, invisible wind shifts, pressure spikes that reversed themselves with impossible neatness, each one appearing shortly before a major disaster. Wildfires in the Pacific Northwest, flash floods in Jakarta, a sandstorm in northern Egypt, all preceded by one or two quiet, trace-free anomalies. Buried in a forgotten Noé mirror server, I found a corrupted folder labeled SSK203 acoustic layers. Most of the files were broken, unreadable, one opened, just audio. A low, pulsing tone like something recorded from the inside of a cave, followed by a rhythmic metallic rattle and a whisper, stretched and muffled like it had been played through water. I couldn't make out the words, but the file always ended the same way, a dry thunderclap, impossibly close, but with no rain. I told no one. My routine changed. I worked late. I watched the sky more than the screens, but even the data started watching back. One morning, I noticed someone had accessed my terminal overnight. Same time each time. 3:17 AM, I was never there. The log said I was. Then I found a hidden folder mislabeled under COINTELPRO archives. Inside it, pieces of unrelated projects threaded together. Operation Popeye. Project HARP. Weather balloons fitted with sonic dispersal tools. A document labeled only Silent Sky Directive, stamped but never signed. It read like a manual for geoengineering by destabilization, rain starvation, targeted, droughts, wind manipulation at borderlines. The theory was no longer a theory. I found a name, Dr. Halden Strauss. I searched databases, records, and articles. Nothing. Just a photo from 1978, his face turned halfway from the camera, standing near an unmarked tower under an overcast sky. When I printed it, the image glitched. The printer jammed. On the second try, The power flickered across the floor. Lights cut out for 7 seconds. When they came back, the photo had printed, but his face was gone. I didn't sleep that night. In a sub-level of Building 4, beneath rusting pipes and unused servers, I found a data room still active, power faint but stable. No cameras, no logs the machines booted to green prompts. On one screen, a prompt blinked. SSK 4X gateway accessed. The videos were decayed, pixelated, eaten alive by static, but I saw enough. A drone dispersing dust into a jet stream, a heat map showing storm systems pulsing unnaturally at timed intervals. Then a video sped up, clouds moving like clock hands, halting, redirecting, spinning unnaturally over a coastline. The final file was audio. The same woman's voice again, this time clearer. The forecast is controlled. The crisis is curated. Do not trust the sky. I didn't know what to feel. I just listened. And then I stopped listening because I knew someone else might be. I backed out of the server room. No lights behind me, just my own breath in my ears and the soft crackle of power still humming. I burned the files onto 3 separate drives. Send them 3 different ways. 1 to a professor I trusted. 1 to a journalist I once dated. 1 to a whistleblower forum. 2 went dark. The 3rd came back with a message. This never reached me. Then silence. The forum account vanished. My credentials were revoked the next day. I was locked out of every system I had touched. My apartment was the only place still mine, and even that began to feel like a replica of the real thing. Then the letter arrived. No return address, just a blank page with 1 line typed in small font near the bottom. You are not cleared to remember. That night, I sat in the dark, listening to rain against the windows, rain that wasn't forecast. I remember thinking, not with fear, but with certainty, the truth only matters to those still awake, and if everyone else is dreaming, maybe the lie becomes the only thing that's real. I went deeper, not out of courage, but because I knew I already couldn't turn back. A new message appeared one morning from an encrypted dead thread, signed only HS. It read, "They don't hide, they erase." Attached was a decades-old report marked Project Silent Sky. Initiation. Report 1972. It outlined test protocols, moisture redirection systems, seeding routes, pressure sequencing to simulate natural disasters, entire economies tested by simulated crop failure, storms pushed toward strategic locations to prompt regime change. It was written plainly, clinically, like a weather forecast for war. I read it 4 times. Not for understanding, just to feel the reality sink into my bones. I looked up at the sky from my window, clouds gentle, light perfect. But it was like looking at a mask you can't remove. I stopped trying to warn people. I posted anonymously, leaked what I could, shared fragments, but the silence was louder than the truth. People scroll past everything now. The noise is too dense. The world has been trained not to notice. Sometimes I still hear the heartbeat. Under that original audio, soft, rhythmic, buried in static. I tell myself it's just a memory. But when storms come at perfect timing, when thunder cracks like a cue and the wind shifts just a second too soon, I think maybe it's them talking again, not to me, but to each other, in a language the atmosphere already understands. And I wonder if the real plan was never to hide it. just to make it feel normal. Some storms are scheduled, some silences are scripted, and some truths aren't hidden at all. They're simply too quiet for anyone to believe. It began with a file that shouldn't have existed. Plain text, no metadata, no author, just one line of black font against a blank screen. Status request, ZR104. I found it buried on an old encrypted drive recovered from a failed asset. Drop-in Prague, the kind of drive we don't catalogue anymore. Too old, too scrambled. At first, I thought it was leftover code from a disbanded program, maybe a signal misrouted through an old back door. But something about the way it was formatted, clean, intentional, felt deliberate. I ran a trace. The file had been accessed 3 days ago from inside our own network. Not from my team, not from any team I could identify. I forwarded it to Ops. The response was short. No such designation exists. But I'd seen the old training decks, the ones we weren't supposed to keep. ZR104 was a Cold War-era ghost asset, officially terminated in 1987. No photo, no birth record, just a call sign on 2 declassified kill lists and one blurry mention in a Venezuelan coup analysis that never made it to public eyes. The file disappeared the next morning, not deleted, wiped, not even fragments left. I didn't report it again. I just kept a copy in my head, and I started watching the silence around it, watching what didn't get said. I started by scanning old op logs, the kind we digitized but never indexed, looking for anomalies tied to ZR class designations. Most were garbage. But eventually patterns began to emerge. Sudden asset closures, comms blackouts, entire safe houses marked abandoned with no reports attached. There were blank gaps where data should have been. Operation Sable Lake, 1992, classified as a failed intercept. No survivor logs, yet equipment requisitions were active for 3 years after. One record noted ZR104 oversight. Confirmed. Continue protocol. It was buried in a logistics spreadsheet. I checked timestamps, edited 4 times in the last decade, always by someone with red level clearance. The problem was red levels don't exist anymore, not officially, not since the restructure. In a forgotten basement wing of the archive, I found an old tape recorder, dusty, cold, like it hadn't been touched in years. Inside a tape marked 10401. I played it, static for 12 seconds, then a voice, measured, low, emotionless. Control is not influence. It's a narrative. Click. That was it. But the voice stayed with me like it wasn't recorded but still speaking. I kept digging, quietly. Cross-referenced old anomalies with internal counter-intel warnings. I found one memo, handwritten, scanned, dated, March 1984. ZR104 activity must remain uncatalogued. Embedded assets must be denied knowledge of the influence layer. It was signed with a symbol, not a name. I'd seen that symbol before on a redacted MK Ultra follow-up project involving cognitive disruption fields. The same symbol showed up in a COINTEL profile flagged for deletion, and again in the background of a surveillance photo taken in Berlin, 1997. 3 agents in that image disappeared within months. One was listed as suicide. 1 relocated. 1 no record. I tried pulling satellite logs for each disappearance zone. Every single one had corrupted telemetry data on the day in question, not missing, just unreadable, as if it was scrambled before it was even stored. I submitted a dummy report to test response times. Within 4 hours, someone accessed my terminal remotely. The screen flickered, then rebooted on its own. When it came back, my draft was gone. In its place was a single image, grainy, grayscale, an eye staring through what looked like a broken lens. I didn't sleep that night. I kept the lights on and the shades closed. There's a facility we don't talk about. Old, unmaintained, supposedly decommissioned. I went alone. The badge still worked, though the reader took longer than it should. Inside it smelled like old paper and rust. Most of the floors were dark, paint peeling, ceiling panels warped from years of forgotten storms. In the third sub-level, I found what used to be a server room, gutted, except for one terminal still running on reserve power. The screen flickered blue. No prompt. Just idle data loops. I plugged in a portable decryptor and let it run. What surfaced was a file chain labeled Z Origin. Each file was time-stamped decades apart. Each contained audio logs, distorted, degraded, overlapping frequencies. One played clearly, a meeting room, voices low, measured. A man speaks. The asset believes he is autonomous. He must. Then silence, followed by a whisper so faint I could barely hear it. The system is the shadow of the agent. I played it again. Same voice, same words, different whisper. He isn't missing. He's watching. I looked at the ceiling. No cameras. But I knew I wasn't alone. I unplugged and left. I didn't look back. I uploaded everything I had to 3 secure nodes, each with unique encryption set to release if I didn't check. In every 48 hours. Within hours, 2 nodes failed. Checksum error, the log said. The third sent an alert. IP breach detected. I shut it down. I called my contact in Brussels. No answer. I called again. Line dead. I emailed. Bounced. His account no longer existed. That night my building lost power for 4 minutes. Long enough for every device in my apartment to reboot. When it came back, my firewall was disabled. No trace of intrusion. Nothing taken except one folder. 104 chain. I still had physical copies, but even holding them felt like a risk. I asked myself whether anyone would believe it, whether they'd care, whether truth mattered anymore, or if we'd passed the point where people could tell the difference between history and control. I sat in the dark, watching headlights cross my window like searchlights, and I heard myself say it out loud. What if truth only matters to those still awake? I met with one last source, someone who'd worked deep black in the 80s. He didn't say hello, just handed me a photo, grainy. A man sitting at a table with 7 others, all blurred, but he wasn't. He looked directly at the lens. Unaged. Alert. The date said 1993. I'd seen him in a briefing photo from 1962. Same eyes, same posture, same watch. He wasn't missing. ZR104 had never disappeared. He'd slipped behind the curtain of narrative, rewritten his role, and guided systems from shadows no one knew to look at. My contact told me something I can't forget. There's no retirement plan for ghosts, just deeper shadows. I asked who else knew. He shook his head. No one knows. They only suspect. That's the design. I walked away, clutching the photo, wondering if we ever had a choice, or if all of this had already been rehearsed.
I don't know what to do with what I found. I still have fragments, but truth doesn't land like it used to. People don't want to believe in ghosts, especially the ones still pulling strings.
I've left messages in buried forums, sent dead letter drops to people who might still care, but the silence is louder now. No responses, no threats, just absence. That's how you know it's real. The deeper I go, the less I understand. Was ZR104 a man or a method? Was he created, or was he always there, moving through the cracks of every event, every decision we thought was ours? Maybe that's the point. Not to know. Just to ask a question. Just enough to never sleep fully again. The photo sits in my drawer. Some nights I swear the man's expression changes. Some nights I think he's still watching. And sometimes, only sometimes, I wonder if I've become part of the script too. It started on a Tuesday, the kind where you forget what you had for breakfast before the mug even cools. Same corridor, same idle hum of the lab's fluorescent lights, same coffee-stained silence of tired minds trying to outrun deadlines. But something blinked where it shouldn't have. A security feed stuttering at 03:41 a.m., only for a second, barely noticeable if I hadn't needed the timestamp for my own research log. The clip looped clean, too clean, cleaner than our system ever managed, and when I slowed it down frame by frame, I saw it. The reflection in Lab 4's glass panel didn't match what was in the room. I ran it again, slower this time, slower than the feed could really handle, and it wasn't until the fourth loop that I noticed the reflection move after the source had stopped, just a breath late, as if the past had hesitated before catching up, and I told myself it was nothing, that maybe the server glitched again, maybe the camera lagged, maybe I just needed more sleep. But walking home that night, I kept glancing into windows, half expecting to see myself still standing back in the lab. I told no one, just started combing through backup archives while pretending to chase irrelevant results, compiling footage from auxiliary lenses no one had touched in months, and what I found felt less like discovery and more like confession. Mirrored inconsistencies, echoes out of sync, doors opening on one feed a full second before the keycard registered on another, like someone or something was brushing against our timeline from the outside. I dug deeper into the data structure, peeling away metadata like brittle wallpaper, and found a hidden cache mislabeled as thermal test footage, buried 3 versions deep under unused directory trees. What I played wasn't a test, it was a conversation between people who didn't exist, discussing protocols and mirror states and anchor loops, with a clinical detachment that made my stomach clench, because the voice on the recording, it was mine, quieter, slower, like it knew too much. And at the end it said my full name, followed by a date that hasn't happened yet. Names started surfacing in the logs, real ones, the kind you find redacted in CIA dumps and denied in Freedom of Information releases, projects like Stargate, Montauk, and something called Mirrorfall, folded into the familiar historical wreckage of MK Ultra and COINTELPRO, except this time the paper trail didn't stop in the 70s, it just moved sideways. Transcripts of phone calls that never happened, security clearances assigned to people with no birth records, footage of military briefings where everyone's face was blurred except for one figure who never blinked, and always seemed to be watching me. The files weren't just forgotten, they were intentionally mislabeled, cross-indexed with weather data, census files and geological surveys, as if hiding in plain sight. I started seeing patterns, recursive ones, names looping back, timestamps, forming spirals, versions of reports I swear I had already read, but slightly altered, as though someone was rewriting their own history in increments. And one morning, my building access denied me, though my badge was active. I stood in the rain, realizing the system now recognized someone else with my credentials. The backup server no one touched was hidden behind a false panel in sublevel, 3 down a corridor that smelled like melted plastic and long dried mold. The machine itself was old, humming like it was remembering something, and the files inside were fragmented, corrupted. Names bled into coordinates, dates flickered like broken neon, and the audio logs played only in static wrapped bursts, punctuated by voices that weren't quite human, tonal, precise yet hollow, as if they were simulating emotion without knowing what it felt like. One clip repeated itself, always cutting out at the same moment. They must not... Then silence, then a low, frequency hum that set my teeth on edge. Another file, video this time, showed a control room like ours but darker, older, with monitors shaped wrong and clocks that ran in opposite directions. Someone stood at the console, back turned, still as stone, until halfway through the clip they turned, slowly, and I saw my own face. Older, drawn, with eyes that didn't recognize me. I sent the recordings to an encrypted drive, buried it in a chain of virtual dead drops across public servers, sent keys to 6 researchers I once trusted, but by morning 2 of them were unreachable, and the 3rd had been locked out of her workstation after a critical systems update that no one else had received. Emails failed to send, my terminal froze mid-transfer, and when I rebooted, every folder related to Mirrorfall was gone, wiped so clean it felt surgical. That night I sat alone in my apartment, lights off, phone face down, watching my reflection
in the black mirror of the TV screen, and I remember thinking, what if truth only matters to those still awake? What if the rest of the world has already been edited?
Because I couldn't remember what I had done 2 days ago, and I wasn't sure anymore if the apartment was mine, or if I had simply stepped into someone else's life, left behind like a half-finished draft. I broke into the server farm, the night before the final test, the one no one talked about, the one that wasn't on any blueprint, and the deeper I went, the more everything felt wrong. Lights flickering at a frequency just beneath comprehension, walls humming as if breathing, and machines that looked more organic than engineered. Inside the core chamber, I found the anchor drive, a spiraling structure suspended in magnetics rotating slowly, and on every surface, images of me, thousands of iterations, frozen in surveillance snapshots and faded thermal scans, as if the system had been watching versions of me for a very long time. Beside it, a console was running logs that hadn't happened yet, displaying outcomes based on choices I hadn't made, timelines collapsing and reforming in real time like someone, flipping channels across realities, and one entry simply read, "Discontinuity triggered. Target self-aware," before it vanished. When I stepped back, the lights dimmed, and I knew, without being told, that someone, or something, was watching me through the mirror. I don't remember leaving the facility, but I woke in my bed, clothes damp with condensation, the smell, of ozone still clinging to my skin like a warning. The files were gone, every drive blank, every backup corrupted, my access revoked from systems I built with my own hands. The building itself was sealed, a new name etched over the entrance.
as if it had never housed what I found.
I told myself to let it go, to return to the surface, to the slow rituals of coffee and inboxes and deadlines, but every now and then I catch my reflection lagging behind, just for a second, just enough to remind me that something broke. And whatever spilled out is still echoing, quietly, invisibly, across versions of me I'll never meet. I tried to explain it once, to someone I trusted, but the words felt foreign, like I was quoting a script I didn't write. Maybe the future isn't ahead of us. Maybe it's circling, watching, rewriting the moment we blink. And maybe that silence we keep hearing isn't empty. It's full of answers we were never meant to survive. I've worked in systems diagnostics for over a decade. Patterns, anomalies, digital lint most people miss. On Tuesday, a name flashed in a flagged data cluster, Thorn, inserted in a daily user log that shouldn't have held names at all. I traced it back, assuming it was an internal patch, a bug, a lazy alias. But there was no commit history, no login, no change in versioning. The name had always been there, even in backups from last year. I stared at the screen as if waiting for the logic to settle back into place. But it didn't. The light from the monitors was too white. The fan in the ceiling clicked every 4 seconds. Everything felt slightly out of tune, like background noise had shifted without permission. That night, I lay awake long past 3, watching the ceiling, wondering how a ghost had typed into a closed system, and why only I had noticed. I began cataloguing the oddities, silent system pings at non-existent nodes, encrypted strings buried in crash reports, files labeled with lunar phase timestamps. The deeper I went, the more I found things that weren't supposed to be there. Partial scans of handwritten pages, network activity tied to unregistered IP blocks and image files, with no visible content but hundreds of kilobytes in size. One of the files, when run through an audio converter, produced a low static hum punctuated by rhythmic pulses, like a heartbeat distorted through sand. It made my skin crawl. I stopped using my home internet and started writing things by hand. A phrase kept appearing, embedded in metadata like a watermark. Selection is inheritance. My hands would shake after long sessions, not from fear, but from the sense that something ancient had wrapped itself around modern code and was watching. They say the mind fills in the blanks. It doesn't. The blanks remain and they rot. Behind one false firewall was an archived feed dump, audio logs from Cold War era surveillance projects that had never gone public, except these weren't American or Russian. The voices whispered in different dialects, none I could place. They spoke of bloodlines, neural purity, and reclaiming the root signal. Cross-referencing file hashes led me to FOIA-released scraps. MK Ultra transcripts, paperclip personnel charts, COINTELPRO photos. But layered between these were other pages marked with a distinct triangular sigil and one phrase repeated like a warning or a rule. Only the dormant can be chosen. Some of the people in the photos had no records elsewhere. One woman, eyes obscured by blur, was noted as activated, recruited, post-threshold. Post what? I hadn't left the apartment in days. My reflection in the black screen lingered, half a second too long. The server room beneath the defunct broadcast station was supposed to be cleared out years ago, but when I pried open the rusted back entrance, the air was stale and charged, like it had held its breath for decades. Among the racks, one unit still flickered, powered by a cable that ran somewhere deeper underground. I connected to its output through a patched terminal and found a live feed of nothing, just noise and vertical sync lines. Then the flicker resolved just for a second into rows of faces. Each face faded in, stared directly at the camera, and vanished. They all looked aware. One was mine, my own face, blank and blinking. Behind it, in the waveform of the accompanying audio, a voice cut through like a whisper at the end of a dream. "You've already entered." Then silence. The feed crashed. I pulled the drive and left. I didn't lock the door behind me. I prepared a file dump, everything I had. My plan was simple: post it to the right forums, send it to journalists, drop it into deadman switches. But the upload failed. Each time, something intervened. Sudden power loss, file corruption, a restart.
Loop.
A contact I trusted, gone. Just silence on every channel. I saw someone standing outside my building 3 nights in a row. Same coat, same motionless stance. I never looked too long. I started to wonder if anyone else could even see what I was seeing. The truth was no longer a matter of access. It had become a question of capacity. Could it even be held, let alone shared? I wrote in my notebook, what if truth only matters to those still awake? The ink bled a little. The page felt thinner than it had an hour before. I decoded the remaining layers manually. No scripts, just ink, paper, and obsession. What surfaced wasn't an organization, it was a selection process, millennia old. Genetic tags hidden in epigenetic markers. An inheritance woven not through bloodlines, but through susceptibility to signal. The order, if it had a name, didn't recruit, it triggered. And it triggered me years ago in ways I had mistaken for coincidences, dreams that turned predictive, strangers who knew my name before I told them, the job offer that arrived without application. I had been chosen long before I found anything, and now my role wasn't to warn, it was to select the next. I opened the encrypted tool they had left for me, a database of profiles, unlabeled, anonymous, just patterns, just signals. I stared at the screen, the quiet horror blooming in my chest. This wasn't a discovery, it was a handoff. I didn't choose anyone. Not yet. But the tool is still open, still blinking softly in the dark, waiting. I've gone offline. I sleep less now. When I do, I hear a faint rhythm in the walls, like code, like breathing. I understand now why the files were whispering. They weren't warnings. They were invitations. Most people will never hear them. Most aren't meant to. Sometimes I wonder if choosing no one is still a kind of compliance. Other times I wonder if I already clicked and forgot. In the end, there's no message. No whistleblower, just echoes looping forever from a signal too old to trace and too quiet to silence. Some knowledge doesn't break you, it absorbs you. And the silence that follows is never truly silent. I used to catalogue wildlife movement in our county, mostly camera traps and satellite tagging. Clean, uneventful work. The kind that lets you listen to trees and silence. Then I noticed the children. At first, it was just minor data drift. Body, temps running low at night, skin tones cooler under UV, pulse irregularities that normalized under starlight. I flagged it for recalibration, thinking it was sensor fatigue. But even the recalibrated units recorded the same strange night shifts. The cameras, especially the ones facing north, caught more, glints in their eyes that blinked out before full-frame capture. One frame, just a blur of a girl standing perfectly still while tree leaves bent in the wrong direction behind her. I told myself it was wind shear. I didn't really believe that. I started staying up later, watching from my window, logging what didn't make sense. I dug back into the county's medical logs, school nurse forms, old biometric studies, buried. In dusty boxes at the municipal annex, patterns emerged where none should have been. Historical data on the same families, same surnames going back generations. Each cycle showing sudden leaps in height, neurological variants, and something listed only as light response. One report from the 80s described a boy who could navigate blindfolded under moonlight. He disappeared before the file was closed. His name wasn't in any census. The files were smudged, half-scanned, but not erased. Like someone wanted the record incomplete, not lost. That same symbol kept showing up too, handwritten near signatures, a star with too many points. The more I followed, the more the unease settled in, not loud, but constant, like a sound too low to prove, but too real to ignore. Something here wasn't mutating, it was awakening. I submitted a request for access to regional bioresearch logs and got a generic denial. No surprise. But a week later, a brown envelope showed up at my door. No return address. Inside were 5 copied pages, redacted medical notes, celestial event overlays, and a photo of an excavation site in the woods north of town. The bones were too small to be adults, too structured to be anything else. One paper had a header I didn't recognize, Project Anthem. Another mentioned triggered regression vectors, whatever that meant. At the bottom, dormant sequences reactivate under interstellar alignment. It wasn't a theory, it was a plan. One designed, measured, and left to wait. The kids weren't anomalies. They were steps in an equation. My hands wouldn't stop, shaking. The basement of the old radio observatory still carried dust, like it remembered sound. There was an old computer in the corner, humming quietly beneath a tarp, as if it had never been turned off. The logs dated back 40 years, but it was the audio archive that mattered. Tapes labeled by hand, each marked by sky conditions. I played 1. Static, mostly. Then a voice, brittle and slow. We were seeded, we respond to light. It glitched, looped. Another voice overlaid it, childlike but off, repeating the same word until it blurred into a tone. I left it running and walked outside. The sky that night was perfectly clear. I saw 3 of the kids standing on the hill, looking straight up. Their hands moved together, not waving, not signaling, just aligning, as if they were remembering something their bodies had known far longer than language. I copied what I could and tried sending it out. Emails, private boards, dead drop servers. Everything bounced, the files corrupted, the drives overheated. A friend who ran amateur sky-watching forums vanished. His site went blank, then redirected to a wildlife conservation page. His phone rang once, then never again. My laptop bricked mid-upload. Every tool I used to observe suddenly began observing me. I scrawled timelines on my wall in permanent marker. It didn't matter. The closer I came to explaining it, the more it slipped. People still smiled in town, but something behind their eyes had closed. I wrote in my notes, "What if truth
only matters to those still awake?"
Then I stopped writing altogether. I went north, past the old range line where even maps blur. There, in a cave near the fault edge, I found what the photo hinted at. A chamber carved by something older than memory. Symbols spiraled along the walls, glowing faintly in moonlight. At the center, a crystal formation, pulsing like breath. I don't know how long I stood there. I don't remember walking out. But when I did, the sky had shifted, slightly but undeniably. I looked at my hands and saw tiny specks beneath the skin, like starlight caught in blood. It wasn't fear anymore. It was understanding. I hadn't been investigating a mystery. I'd been part of a sequence. Something turned on inside me, and I knew who else would feel it next. I haven't gone back to town. The signal is too strong now. Even silence hums. I still hear the voices sometimes, soft and overlapping, not words, but impressions. The children were never changed. They were unlocked. I've stopped asking why. I've stopped trying to stop it. Some things aren't accidents. Some things are planted deep, to bloom when the stars align. I kept the telescope logs out of habit, even though no one at the Institute had reviewed them since the funding cut 6 years ago. They'd become a quiet ritual, part of my evening rhythm. Brew the tea, calibrate the equipment, record the stillness of a sky that rarely offered surprises. But last March, Sector 4A showed something off. A misalignment so slight it might have gone unnoticed by anyone else. A 4-star cluster near Cepheus, always a perfect diamond, now seemed skewed. Just 1 star nudged left, almost imperceptible, yet wrong in a way I couldn't shake. I assumed heat distortion, a faulty lens, maybe even my own tiredness after long nights alone. But when I compared the frames from 1992, 2003 and 2011, something had clearly shifted. Same stars, different arrangement, like one had moved in the silence between years. It wasn't a glitch, not this consistent, and certainly not this patient. I sat in the dim server room that night, the hum of cooling fans unusually loud, staring at that subtle, quiet drift until the air felt thick, like I was being watched. The next morning, I started pulling old archives, physical ones, the analog reels and floppies stored in the far end of the lab's forgotten wing. I found layers of dust, moth-eaten logs, and buried among them were field notes from someone named Sal, a technician I couldn't find any record of. No departure file, no digital trace, just faded pencil notes with dozens of star sketches, each marked with small arrows, movement lines, time gaps. Over and over he'd written the same cryptic line beneath the coordinates. They rearrange when unseen. His logs ended abruptly, the last entry circled in red. but it was the way he'd drawn the stars that stuck with me, not as points, but as eyes, half-lidded and alert. I kept digging deeper into the archives, into long-abandoned backup directories labelled innocuously Sky Archive All 96 and Deep Track logs. But inside were redacted memos, some stamped with government seals, others scrubbed of any header at all. Names of old half-whispered programs emerged, MK Ultra, Paperclip, COINTELPRO, and among them others I'd never heard before, Obsidian Array, Operation Redfield, Project Wonderlight. Each referenced anomalous celestial behavior, observational response events, and retinal interference thresholds. One document even described early telescopic observations as initiatory triggers, suggesting our act of looking was itself a catalyst, not just observation, but interaction. It felt like opening a drawer not meant for human hands, finding a language half buried in static and secrecy. I followed coordinates buried in the metadata of a corrupted audio file, an old NOAA listening station, supposedly defunct since 1987 off Route 7, behind rusted gates and swallowed by weeds. Inside, the upper floors had collapsed, walls soft. With mould, but deep in the basement, one server rack still glowed faintly. I jacked in with a portable reader and pulled what I could, garbled logs, distorted voice clips, layers of hiss and silence. Among them was a file labelled Wander, hours of white noise that, when isolated and slowed, revealed soft mechanical tones like distant breathing wrapped in static. And in some clips, under the hiss, a voice, not loud, not clear, but insistent, repeating, "They move when watched too long." I played it again and again, headphones pressed tight, feeling the air around me thicken until the silence between pulses became more terrifying than the sounds themselves. I uploaded pieces of it to my mirrors, encrypted caches, anonymous boards. At first, the files stayed up. Then they didn't. Links broke, mirrors vanished. My drive crashed without warning. I called an old contact, Gibbons. He ran a small astrophysics forum, but our thread stopped mid-discussion, his last unsent post reading only, "Closer." A day later, the forum went dark. No outage report. No archive. Just gone. That was when I started writing it all down on paper. Ink can't be scrubbed, I thought. I began to wonder if this was always the outcome, not discovery, but erasure. My backup drives rebooted with only a single empty folder left behind, its name changed to OpenEyes. I tried to sleep, but the dreams returned, drifting stars, reshaping themselves in slow spirals, blinking once as I looked away. I drove out to the desert where Gibbons had once run a sky array, his last known location. The equipment was gone, the compound fenced off by some contractor with no name, no badge. I camped there anyway, alone under the sharp, cold sky, an old parabolic dish turned upward. For 3 nights, nothing. Then, just past 2 a.m., the stars shifted. Not a falling, not a blink, but a movement, collective and seamless, like pieces on a cosmic board, realigning just out of reach. I felt no triumph, only a quiet collapse inside me, the realization that whatever this was, it was older than us, more patient than we could imagine, and perfectly attuned to our curiosity. Whatever truth we were chasing, it had already accounted for it. And now I don't share anything, not because I'm afraid, but because it doesn't seem to matter. No one wants to listen. No one wants to see. People don't vanish dramatically, they just fade. Sal, Givens, the forums, the records, even memories. I speak less, I trust less, I watch more. Not the stars, but the spaces where things used to be. Sometimes I hear a quiet hum in old machines I've shut off. Sometimes I see the pattern return to its original shape when I'm not looking. I've come to believe the watchers don't need to hide. They just need us to forget. I used to enjoy the rhythm of mornings, the steam of the coffee pot, the soft creak of the floorboards, the bathroom light flickering once before staying steady. I'd shave, wash my face, glance into the mirror without thinking. It was all so ordinary until the day I noticed a scar beneath my left eye, faint like an old injury. But I had no memory of it, and when I touched the skin, it didn't hurt, just sat there like it had always belonged. I blamed poor sleep, maybe a bump.
I forgot.
But the next day, the scar was gone, and something else was different, subtle, hard to name. The kitchen window seemed narrower. A picture frame was crooked, though I hadn't touched it. Then my phone buzzed with a message from a name I didn't recognize, someone thanking me for last night. There had been no last night. That evening, I stared longer into the mirror. My reflection looked back, as expected, but something in the eyes felt off, delayed or duller, like it was trying too, hard to mimic understanding. I shut the light off and walked away, but the unease stayed, low and sticky behind my ribs. The next few weeks blurred. I started logging mirror glances in a notebook, noting what changed, when. At first it was minor, a freckle, a different shirt than I remembered wearing, a subtle shift in my expression. But soon the changes reached beyond me. The neighbour's dog that used to bark every morning had vanished, and when I asked about it, she looked confused and said she never owned one. At work, a co-worker I remembered sharing coffee with daily simply wasn't there anymore. No desk, no name tag, no one else mentioning him. I found old security footage in our office cloud archive that showed me speaking alone in places I swore he'd been standing. I downloaded what I could, but some clips stuttered, flickered, glitched, my face blurring for seconds at a time. The mirror, I started to suspect, wasn't reflecting, it was observing, adjusting. Every time I looked, it reshaped the world by increments, and I began to dread even brushing my teeth, unsure what would be missing when I looked up. I traced the mirror's manufacturer out of desperation, an old model from a defunct furniture chain. Their records were sparse, burned-out servers, archived PDFs, nothing current. But one folder held a string of complaint logs, barely legible, all handwritten scans. They were from people who described symptoms I now knew too well. Memory lapses, inconsistent scars, family members forgetting birthdays or entire people. One report mentioned a project from the 1970s, Mirror Point, a military psychology program with ties to MK Ultra, supposedly exploring how mirrored surfaces interacted with self-perception under stress. Another referred to something called observer drift and linked it to deep surveillance conditioning. It was buried in bureaucratic rot, stamped approvals, notes about early testing phases, and a quiet mention of containment via identity dilution. I felt a growing pressure behind my temples reading it, as if my brain wanted to reject what it saw. The deeper I read, the more I understood. This wasn't new. I wasn't the first. I was just the latest drift. A tip from a forum led me to a storage unit 3 counties away, rented under the name of a professor who vanished in 1983. It held boxes of VHS tapes, journals filled with numbers, sketches of faces not quite human. I played one of the tapes, grainy black and white, showing a man sitting in front of a mirror. He smiles, then slowly panics. His reflection doesn't mimic him anymore, it lags. Then it stops altogether, staring straight ahead as the man screams. The footage ends in static. Another tape showed a whisper-thin voice repeating coordinates and a date looping endlessly. On the back of the tape was written, "Don't trust the 6th." The mirror in my apartment was the 6th I'd owned since moving here. I stared at it that night until my reflection blinked before I did. My legs went weak. I didn't sleep.
I didn't touch anything. I just sat, watching it, wondering if it was waiting for me to blink again. I tried to warn people. Emails, uploads, message boards. Some files wouldn't send. Others were immediately corrupted.
One friend answered my call, heard my voice, then called back 5 minutes later, confused, saying she hadn't spoken to me in weeks. I left messages on voicemail systems that later didn't exist. I mailed a flash drive to myself. It never arrived. I started to question who was still real. At work, a colleague's face seemed subtly wrong, eyes too wide, like someone trying to impersonate familiarity. She asked if I was sleeping. I wasn't. I couldn't. I started unplugging. Electronics covering mirrors with cloths, but the 6th remained. Something about it defied being covered. Once I walked past it in the dark, and I swear I saw someone behind it. Not a reflection, but depth, like a hallway beyond the glass. I whispered to it. I don't know why. It didn't answer, but the lights in the apartment dimmed for half. A second, and the static hum of the fridge cut out just long enough to let me hear a faint breath. I stood in front of it the next morning, eyes burning from no sleep, and watched myself move, except I wasn't moving yet. The reflection turned first. My hand stayed at my side, his rose. And in that second, I knew I'd never been the one in front. The real me, the one with memory intact, with a life not slowly edited away, was behind the mirror, watching, forgotten. I was the copy, the decay. I was the hollowed-out placeholder left to erode until I broke completely. Every time I looked into the mirror, it took something from me, not just detail, but essence. It had been trading versions of me for years, shedding layers like skin, leaving only the shell behind to notice too late. The reflection wasn't just me, it was what was left of me. Now I live carefully. I avoid glass, metal, even shadows that bend too cleanly. I don't know what's watching, but I know it's still there, always waiting for one more glance. I try not to look, but the urge pulls stronger every day. I forget things, important things. Names fade faster. Photographs don't match my memories. I'm not sure how long I've been in this version. Maybe the real me is long gone. Maybe I was never real at all. But I can feel it now, just beneath the surface, a ripple, a breath, a gaze that isn't mine. Every night at 2 a.m., I logged the coastal band transmissions, just static and weather pulses, sometimes a lost boat calling out to no one. It was quiet work, mechanical, comforting in its repetition, until Channel 59A broke protocol 3 nights ago. It started with 5 seconds of sound that didn't belong, a fizzing undercurrent that built into what almost resembled a word, half-formed, like a language learning to crawl. I flagged it, saved the segment, and tried to forget it. But when I played it back, the file name had changed on its own to They Hear You Too, and my folder flickered, reloaded, and then froze. No one else at the station noticed. I convinced myself it was nothing, but the next night the lights in the booth dimmed every time I turned to 59A, and I started hearing something beneath the static, soft, rhythmically timed like breathing or waiting. I told myself it was just a glitch. Still, I began keeping the lights on even when I left. There's a kind of silence that doesn't want to be left alone. I began tracing the anomaly, not because I believed in anything, but because I couldn't stop thinking about that tone. It came back every time. The world went quiet. In the station's back room, behind a cabinet labelled Do Not Audit, I found tape reels from 10, 20 years ago, all labelled with 59A, all untouched, dust-choked, left to decay. Most were just static, but the way the static moved, it felt rehearsed. One reel from 1997 whispered coordinates that didn't exist on any map I could find. I cross-referenced them with electromagnetic dead zones, places untouched by GPS or satellite. The tapes weren't just collecting sound, they were communicating, but with who or what I couldn't say. The logs attached to the tapes bore names. That didn't match any known personnel, initials that repeated through decades, with gaps where data had clearly been wiped, sloppy erasures, as if someone had tried too hard to make it disappear. The air in the station grew colder as the week went on. Radios began to pick up the tone even when powered off. The sound wasn't just broadcast, it was embedded. The more I investigated, the more impossible it all seemed. I found declassified fragments of programs I'd only heard rumors about, MK Ultra, Paperclip, and something called Operation Audition, buried in the margins of Cold War black budgets. They had experimented not on people, but on wavelengths, searching for consciousness in transmission. Their theory? Thought could be encoded in static. I discovered references to voice phenomenology trials led by post-war recruits no one ever publicly acknowledged. I wasn't tracing a signal. I was uncovering a Cold War experiment that hadn't ended, only moved deeper underground. Vehicles began following me. My supervisor stopped returning my calls. Then I received a package with no return address. Inside was a tape labelled Earth Prime. When played, it was blank until it wasn't. The voice that came through was my own, whispering words I'd never said, ending with a phrase I still can't explain. We are not the first version. Desperate for answers, I found an old broadcast relay tower off a road that hadn't appeared on GPS since 1993. Inside, a bunker sealed in rust and mildew held servers long since fried, but one drive was still intact. It held looping footage
of a man sitting motionless in a radio room identical to mine, except the timestamp was from 1962. The man on screen looked exactly like me.
His lips moved, but no sound came out until I turned off my volume. Then I heard it, low-frequency tones bleeding into the room around me, whispering in sync with his lips, not English, but not noise. The message? Open transmission achieved. Awaiting invitation. When I copied the footage and tried to play it back at the station, the screen froze, and the only thing that played was a single second of text. Thank you for building the mouth. I tried sharing what I had. I uploaded fragments, sent anonymous emails, and posted to radio operator forum. Every attempt failed. My drives corrupted, accounts deleted, backups overwritten. Someone I trusted vanished. His apartment was stripped, his name erased from tenancy records. When I checked my own logs, folders I hadn't touched were now labeled with phrases I didn't write. Witnessed, heard, repeat cycle. A stranger contacted me through a burner signal and said only this: "There's no stopping what wants to be heard." The next morning, the booth smelled of ozone, and the power grid failed for 3 blocks. That night, the voice returned, stronger, clearer, telling me, "Your signal was pure. That is why we answered." I found an old Cold War satellite, relay link still active, high in the hills. I climbed it, dragging the tapes, the logs, everything. I broadcast it all, not knowing who was listening. 4 days passed and the station's equipment began activating on its own, playing messages I hadn't sent. Voices from the signal weren't warning us. They were rehearsing an arrival. It hadn't been interference. It had been a negotiation. The breach wasn't imminent. It had already happened. And we were the ones who'd made it possible. I stopped logging after that. The transmissions come and go now, but each time they leave behind something new. Files that contain my voice speaking phrases I don't remember saying, notes I didn't write, and dreams I can't wake from. People pass me on the street and nod like they've heard it too, but no one speaks of it. The signal is quieter now, but more precise. It waits. It watches. It's inside everything that listens. And I can't help but wonder, as I sit here with the radio humming gently behind me, if this was always part of the broadcast. If we were never meant to hear the warning because it was never a warning at all. It was an invitation. And now, it's listening for your reply. It started like most anomalies do, not with panic, but with a quiet correction. A routine sonar sweep on the Mariana Trench shelf had returned a flat line, an impossibility considering the terrain. No slope, no rock spines, just a perfect horizontal, band beneath the silt, smooth and unnaturally reflective. The logs called it a sensor drift. Our technician labeled the anomaly Echo 9 and flagged it for later review. That would have been the end of it if not for the dive cam footage that followed, a 12-second clip of nothing but still, silver reflection mirroring back the submersible blinking lights with impossible precision. No distortion, no motion, just the abyss staring back. The footage was archived, but when I tried to access it again, it played upside down, and the timestamp had been replaced with coordinates I didn't recognize. They weren't in our database, but they pointed to the same depth, several hundred miles east, another mirror, another unknown. I didn't tell anyone, but I downloaded the corrupted footage and kept it on a personal drive. It wasn't fear I felt, just a kind of stillness, like something waiting to be remembered. I couldn't stop thinking about those coordinates, and the more I looked into them, the more I realized this wasn't the first time we'd seen something like Echo 9. Buried in outdated dive logs dating back to the early 90s were similar entries marked as sensor ghosts or equipment interference, each one leading to regions now listed as restricted or structurally unstable. The ocean has always hidden what it doesn't want found, but someone had been covering these tracks deliberately. At a decommissioned research lab of the Aleutians, I found a rusted server in an abandoned control room, its floor damp with condensation and the hum of forgotten power still running through the walls. There, I found folders labeled Mirror End and Reflect Origins. Most of it was scrambled binary, but one file contained a fragment of a diver's transmission, just 3 words spoken in a breathless whisper. There's another Earth. I listened to it 14 times before it cut to static. The voice wasn't unfamiliar. It belonged to a diver who had been declared lost 10 years ago on an unsanctioned trench descent. Officially, he never surfaced. But now he was speaking again, from somewhere beneath. When I traced Mirror End to the black budget logs, I found more than I wanted. Unmarked project names cross-linked with defense and intelligence agencies, and an archived file that referenced anthropogenic temporal reflection dated back to the Cold War. There were notes from Project Stargate mixed with deep-sea telemetry mentioning mirrored environments behaving like memory archives. Another document was more explicit. Abyssal layers may intersect with chronospatial. Imprints, engagement not recommended. I uncovered images supposedly from 1974, grainy photos showing divers suspended before vast silver walls that perfectly reflected not just their bodies, but their movements, slightly out of sync, like old film loops. Some documents referenced mirror bleed. The idea that observing one of these surfaces too long could lead to what they called dimensional sync. The phrase kept appearing in diver medical reports next to words like hallucination, identity disassociation, and finally, retrieval terminated. Every mirror found had been sealed off or detonated. Every file that remained was redacted in thick, clumsy blocks. And the deeper I dug, the more I felt like something unseen had started, watching me back. I made contact with a former contractor who claimed to have worked on one of the earlier mirror excavations before the project was dissolved. We met in a storage facility in New Mexico, surrounded by dust-caked monitors and decaying hard drives. He wouldn't give his name. He only handed me a thumb drive and said, "Don't play it near water." The file was raw audio, diver communications from what was supposed to be a routine trench survey. It started normal, status updates, oxygen levels. But then came the echoes, voices repeating back their words with slight changes in tone and timing, as if something else was rehearsing their sentences from the other side. One diver asked, "Do you see that?" before his voice fractured into 3 overlapping versions of itself, each one speaking in delay. The last message recorded, "Before signal loss," was a phrase spoken clearly. "We're not copies, we're what comes after." I watched the contractor's hands shake as he said, "They never went missing. They just kept going." That night, the drive vanished from my bag. In its place was a note I hadn't written. "You're almost through." I tried to share what I had. Sent files to researchers, to independent journalists, to private oceanography networks. Responses came slowly, then stopped. One email arrived from a university domain 2 days after I sent the files. It simply read, "You shouldn't be listening." When I called the number attached, the line disconnected on the first ring. The original drive corrupted when I tried to copy it. My hard drive failed the same evening along with my phone. Someone else knew, and they were erasing things faster than I could back them up. My colleague Jonah, who had helped me pass the files, didn't show up for work the next day. His apartment was cleared out within hours, like he'd never lived there. At night I kept hearing faint echoing clicks from my sink and bathtub drains, like sonar pings rebounding from someplace impossibly deep. I began writing things down by hand, recording onto analog tape, keeping everything offline. I looked at myself in the mirror longer than I should have one night, and for just a second I saw my reflection blink before I did. I whispered aloud, almost involuntarily, "What if truth only matters to those still awake?" There was one last mirror site, never officially documented, buried beneath a private drilling platform that had gone offline in the early 2000s. I bribed my way onto a vessel with outdated clearance and descended alone. At the lowest point of the trench, beneath a crust of sediment, the wall waited, perfect, silent, immense. When my lights passed over it, it didn't reflect me, it reflected something standing beside me. I couldn't turn my head fast enough to see it. The glass of my helmet fogged instantly. I heard voices over the radio, speaking in languages I almost understood, like memories of tongues I'd forgotten. And then I heard myself, my own voice, calm, distant, saying things I hadn't said yet. The wall rippled like water, and the world outside my suit pulsed like breath. I reached out. My hand stopped against the surface, but my fingers kept going. I felt not cold, but recognition, like something remembering me back. I should have pulled away, but I didn't. The last thing I recorded was my voice, speaking softly. We never left. We were just on the other side of the glass. Now I live in the quiet, or whatever's left of it. No one comes to the station anymore. The last team to descend never returned, but their radio signals still echo faintly from below, transmitting phrases that shouldn't exist. My name has started appearing in logs I never touched. When I sleep, I dream in sonar. When I wake, I feel the pressure of something just outside my walls, listening. Sometimes I hear my voice humming through the plumbing, finishing sentences I haven't said. I've stopped asking where the mirrors lead. Maybe they don't lead anywhere. Maybe they're doors or recordings or memories folded too tightly to unfold. All I know is they're still there, beneath the currents, beneath the weight of everything we thought was real. And whatever is behind them hasn't finished speaking yet. Maybe it never will. The ocean remembers what we bury, and some reflections were never meant to be returned. It started the way most things do, not with chaos, but with silence. I was archiving an old school board database, digitizing footage from a shuttered boarding school that had been closed since the late 90s for reasons no one seemed to remember. The tapes were labeled by year, dusty plastic cases stacked with careless handwriting. Most were static-filled, uneventful, students at assembly, morning drills, fire alarms, but tape 1994B played differently. It stuttered, glitched mid-frame, skipping back a few seconds and repeating a child's chant I couldn't make out. I adjusted the tracking dial and heard it again, faint, like a whisper behind the sound. Then the audio cut, leaving only the
low hum of the tape's motor and a flicker in my chest I couldn't explain.
There was nothing overt, nothing you'd call wrong. Just a half-second delay in logic. but I kept replaying it long after I should have moved on. That night I couldn't sleep, not from fear, but from a feeling that something old was knocking, from the inside. I pulled the school's property records next, not out of duty, but curiosity. Something in that tape scratched at the edges of memory. The files had gaps. Administrative logs ended months before the school officially closed. Several student names appeared in early rosters, then vanished mid-term without transfer forms. One name, E. Bellamy, showed up on 3 different rosters, in 3 different years, but always as a new student. I found a locked folder on a hard drive marked Behavioral Evaluations and cracked it open with an old passcode buried in the metadata of a JPEG. Inside were scanned notes, observations of children responding to auditory anchors, entries signed by initials with no credentials, and a recurring phrase, "Echo consistency achieved." My screen flickered once, then stilled, and for the first time in years I double-locked my apartment door. They had called it a pilot school for gifted youth, but behind the glossy brochures there were references to deeper frameworks. Project Monarch, Operation Chatter, cross-referenced. By number codes I matched to declassified CIA documents. I wasn't looking for a story anymore. I was trying to understand what this place had been. An FOIA request got me a partial report, pages redacted so heavily they read like abstract poetry. What I did see mentioned joint operations between psychological research branches and a civilian developmental initiative that went dormant after '96. A colleague I contacted about one of the doctors listed, Dr. R. Klein, never responded. Her inbox went dark. A week later, her social profiles were scrubbed clean, as if she'd never worked the beat. I found myself rereading my own notes, unsure what I'd actually written and what had been suggested. That's when I first saw the file labelled Subject 035 inverted recall. My birth year was in the corner. I drove out to what was left of the school. The building was bones, caved-in roof, vines curling through broken windows, the last bell long rusted, silent. But the basement door still opened. Inside, under layers of dust and mildew, I found a room sealed behind industrial shelving, its walls padded and lined with old VHS servers. Power was dead, but one terminal flickered to life when I brushed against the desk, some backup battery humming in protest. On screen, file titles scrolled like a ghost roll call, anchor tests, wake protocols, suppression index. I opened a video labeled Subject 035, Repetition 12. A younger me stared back, maybe 10 years old, sitting in a small chair, headphones
on, nodding slowly as a voice repeated numbers and colours in monotone. The boy, me, spoke them back in sync.
The audio distorted, clipped, then a phrase emerged beneath the noise. When the journalist returns, you will remember. The screen froze. My hands were shaking. Somewhere above me, something echoed that I couldn't hear. I tried to send what I found, cut the footage into segments, masked the voice, drafted the article, but each upload failed. My editor stopped replying, then someone keyed my car with the word sleep. I stayed up for 3 nights straight, watching old interview tapes of former students, none of whom remembered the school as anything but normal. A girl from one clip mouthed something silently when the interviewer turned away. I looped it until I read her lips. Don't wake them. My internet glitched every hour like clockwork. I started seeing a white van parked down the block at night, its engine off, windshield reflective. One morning, my apartment door was unlocked, but nothing was taken. Just my hard drive powered on, with a single new file on my desktop titled, "You are still inside." I didn't open it. I couldn't. I just stared, wondering if truth only matters to those still awake. I left everything behind, moved states, changed my name, burned every file that held my fingerprint. But even in the quiet, I hear things. Certain songs on the radio feel off, like they're speaking to me. I saw a billboard last week that wasn't there before, displaying a phrase I'd seen in the footage. All roads return to memory.
I don't know who to trust. I don't even trust myself. I remember things I don't think I ever lived. People, rooms, sequences of words that unlock feelings I shouldn't have.
And sometimes, when I hear the right sequence, in just the right tone, I freeze, eyes locked, breath held, as if I'm waiting for something, an instruction, a command. And then I blink, and it's gone. But each time I come back with less certainty, less self. And now I wonder if I've already sent the leak, if I've already been triggered, if this is the program completing itself. It's quiet now. No alarms, no calls, no chases. Just a slow erosion of names, of reasons, of the line between investigation and awakening. I found a tape recorder in my drawer today. I don't remember placing it there, but it's playing the same voice from that old tape, looping a sentence I've come to dread. The awakened must forget in order to remain. Maybe I was never the journalist. Maybe the act of searching was itself a script. Sometimes I catch my reflection lagging behind my movement, like the part of me that's real is still catching up. I tried to record this, to tell someone, but the audio deletes itself by morning. I no longer know what's mine, what was planted, what was triggered. All I know is this. The silence feels coordinated now, like it's waiting. And the scariest part isn't that someone's still watching. It's that I might still be listening.